There was once a king whom God loved, a man who had been pulled from the dust, plucked from the fields where he tended sheep, and placed upon the most important throne on earth. His name was David, and for years his story was a song of triumph. He slew giants, he conquered cities, he unified a divided kingdom, and when night fell over Jerusalem, he composed psalms that made the heavens tremble. The angels paused to listen. God himself inclined his ear, because David was not merely a warrior, he was a worshipper, a poet of the soul, a man who knew the sound of the divine voice like few mortals had ever known it before. But even men whom God loves can fall, and when they fall, the fall is long, deep, and devastating, not only for them, but for everyone who bears their name. It all began on a rooftop, a warm night in Jerusalem, when the air smelled of jasmine and the stars covered the sky like a silver mantle. David was not at war where he should have been. He had sent Joab with the armies, but he had stayed behind. And that night, as he walked along the terrace of his palace, his eyes fell upon a woman bathing in a nearby house. Her name was Bathsheba, and she was the wife of Uriah, one of his most loyal soldiers. David looked at her, and instead of turning his eyes away, he sent for her. What happened that night was not love. It was lust disguised as power. And when Bathsheba became pregnant, David did the unthinkable. He ordered that Uriah be placed on the most dangerous front line of battle. And then he ordered the other soldiers to pull back, leaving him alone before the enemy. Uriah died, and David took Bathsheba as his wife. Silence. The palace kept the secret. The courtiers lowered their gaze, and David continued to rule as if nothing had happened. But God was not silent. Months later, a man appeared in the king's court. His name was Nathan. He was a prophet, and he came with a story. He told David about a rich man who had many sheep, but who stole the only lamb from a poor man. A lamb that slept in his lap, that ate from his bread, that was like a daughter to him. And when David heard the story, his face burned with rage. "That man deserves to die," he shouted, "and he must repay 4 times what he stole." Then Nathan looked him in the eye and spoke the words that would split the history of Israel in 2. "You are that man." David froze. The color drained from his face. His hands trembled. And Nathan continued, "Thus says the Lord, the sword shall never depart from your house. I will raise up evil against you from within your own household. I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor. And he will lie with your wives in the sight of the sun. For you did this in secret, but I will do this before all Israel and in broad daylight." David fell to his knees. "I have sinned against the Lord," he whispered. And Nathan answered, "The Lord has put away your sin, you shall not die. But the child that has been born to you shall die." And so it was. The child grew ill. David fasted for 7 days, lying flat on the ground, begging God for mercy. But on the 7th day, the child died. And David rose, washed himself, changed his clothes, and worshipped, because he understood that God's mercy did not erase the consequences of sin. It only made them bearable, but what was coming next would not be bearable. Not for David, not for anyone. Nathan's prophecy would begin to be fulfilled in the flesh of his own sons, and the first act of that tragedy would bear the name of Amnon. Amnon was the firstborn of David, born of Ahinoam, the Jezreelitess. He was the crown prince, first in line for the throne, and like many sons of kings, he grew up surrounded by privileges he never earned and a power he never learned to handle. But what would destroy him was not power, it was desire, because Amnon became obsessed with his half-sister. Her name was Tamar. She was the daughter of David and Maacah, daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. Tamar was beautiful, and she was a virgin, and Amnon desired her with an intensity that made him physically ill, literally. The servants noticed how the prince was wasting away. He would not eat, he would not sleep. He wandered through the palace corridors with sunken eyes and trembling hands. It was not love. It was an obsession devouring him from the inside out. And the worst was yet to come. Amnon had a cousin. His name was Jonadab, son of Shimea, David's brother. Jonadab was cunning. The Bible describes him so. A very shrewd man. But his shrewdness was not the kind that belongs to a wise man. It was the kind that belongs to a serpent. One day, Jonadab approached Amnon and asked him why the king's son looked so haggard day after day. And Amnon, unable to contain his torment, confessed the truth. "I am in love with Tamar," he said, "the sister of my brother Absalom." He could not even bring himself to call her his own sister. In his lust, he reduced her to the sister of another. And Jonadab, instead of rebuking him, instead of warning him, instead of reminding him of the law of God that forbade such a thing, designed a plan for him. "Go to bed," he told him. "Pretend you are sick. When your father comes to visit you, ask him to send Tamar to prepare food for you." And so he did. Amnon lay down. He faked the illness. And when David the king, the father, came to visit him, Amnon asked that Tamar be sent to his house to cook for him. David suspected nothing. He sent his daughter. He sent her straight into the jaws of the wolf. Tamar arrived at Amnon's house. She prepared the dough in front of him. She baked cakes. She brought him the tray. But Amnon refused to eat. "Send everyone out," he ordered. The servants left. The door closed. And then Amnon looked at Tamar and told her to bring the food into his bedroom. She obeyed. She had no reason to suspect anything. He was her brother. And when she entered the room, Amnon grabbed her. He held her with force. "Come, my sister, lie with me." Terror seized Tamar. Her voice came out desperate. "No, my brother, do not do this to me. Such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not commit this outrage." And then she pleaded, "Speak to the king. He will not refuse you." It was a stratagem. Tamar was trying to buy time, trying to escape, because she knew the law of Moses forbade marriage between half-siblings. But Amnon did not listen. He refused to listen. He overpowered her, and he lay with her. Silence. What came next revealed the true nature of what Amnon felt, because immediately after violating her, he despised her. The Bible says the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the so-called love with which he had loved her. That single sentence strips bare the difference between love and lust. Love seeks the good of the other. Lust seeks to consume the other. And when lust gets what it wants, all that remains is contempt. Amnon looked at Tamar and spoke two words that were more cruel than the violation itself. "Get up. Leave." Tamar, shattered, answered him, "This evil of sending me away is worse than the other you have done to me." But he would not listen. He called his servant and ordered him, "Throw this woman out and bolt the door behind her. Throw this woman out." He did not even call her by name. He did not even call her sister. He reduced her to that. "This woman." The servant put her out and bolted the door. Tamar walked into the street. She was wearing a long-sleeved robe, the garment worn by the virgin daughters of the king. But she was no longer a virgin. She was no longer the same. She tore her robe. She put ashes on her head. She covered her face with her hands, and she walked through the streets of Jerusalem, weeping, crying out, her soul torn into 1,000 pieces. And then her brother Absalom found her. He saw her with her hands on her head. He saw her with the torn robe. He saw her destroyed, and he asked what he already knew. "Has your brother Amnon been with you?" Tamar could not answer. She did not need to. Absalom embraced her, and he told her, "Be quiet for now, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this to heart." But Absalom's words were not comfort. They were containment, because behind those eyes that looked at Tamar with tenderness, something was catching fire, something dark, something that would take 2 years to explode, but that was already unstoppable. Tamar went to live in Absalom's house, desolate. The word the Bible uses is exact, desolate, like a land scorched by fire, like a field where nothing can grow anymore. But what hurts most about this story is not what Amnon did. It is what David did not do. The Bible says that when David heard about everything that had happened, he was very angry. That is all. He was angry, but he did nothing. He did not punish Amnon. He did not seek justice for Tamar. He did not intervene as a father or as a king. The Dead Sea Scrolls and the Greek version add a devastating phrase that explains his silence. He did not punish his son Amnon because he loved him, for he was his firstborn. David, the man who had killed Goliath, who had faced Saul, who had conquered entire nations, could not confront the sin of his own son. And David's silence was the gasoline that fed the fire of Absalom. Because if the king would not deliver justice, someone else would, in his own way, in his own time, and with his own hands. The days dragged on like wounds that would not heal. 1 year, 2 years. Absalom did not speak a word to Amnon, neither good nor bad. Nothing. The silence between brothers was more terrifying than any threat. Amnon may have thought that time had resolved everything, that the scandal had faded, that Absalom had forgotten. But Absalom had not forgotten. Absalom was planning. After 2 full years, Absalom organized a feast, a celebration for the shearing of his sheep at Baal Hazor near Ephraim. He invited all the king's sons, and he appeared before David with a request. "My lord and king, come with your servants to the feast." David refused. "We should not all go," he said. "I do not want to be a burden to you," Absalom insisted. But David would not yield. Then Absalom changed his strategy. "Since you will not come, at least let my brother Amnon go with us." David looked at him with suspicion and asked something that reveals that deep down he sensed the danger. "Why should Amnon go with you?" But Absalom pressed, he pleaded, he insisted, and David once again gave in. He let Amnon go. He sent his firstborn straight into a trap, and with him he sent all his sons. The banquet was magnificent, worthy of a prince. Food was plentiful, wine flowed freely, musicians played, and Amnon, oblivious to everything, drank, cup after cup, laugh after laugh, not knowing that every sip brought him closer to his death. Absalom had given a secret order to his servants. "Watch carefully. When Amnon is merry with wine, when I give you the signal, kill him. Do not be afraid. I am the one giving the order. Be brave, do it." The night wore on. The sound of laughter filled the air. And then the moment came. Absalom gave the signal, and his servants rushed upon Amnon. They stabbed him, and they killed him right there, in the middle of the banquet, in the middle of the music, in the middle of the spilled wine and the screams of horror. The chaos was instant. The rest of David's sons leapt from their seats. They mounted their mules, and they fled. Meanwhile, a rumor raced toward Jerusalem faster than any messenger. Absalom has killed all the king's sons. Not one is left alive. When David heard those words, he rose. He tore his robe. He threw himself to the ground, and his servants tore their garments with him. The palace was filled with weeping. David believed he had lost all his sons. But then Jonadab arrived, the same cunning cousin who had designed the plan that destroyed Tamar. And he told David, "Let not my lord suppose that they have killed all the young men. Only Amnon is dead. This has been determined since the day he violated Tamar. Only Amnon. As if the death of a son could be reduced to that word, only." And as David wept, the rest of his sons arrived in Jerusalem, screaming, weeping, alive. But one was missing. Absalom had fled. Absalom ran north. He crossed borders, and he took refuge in Geshur, in the land of his maternal grandfather Talmai, son of Ammihud, king of Geshur. There he remained for 3 years, 3 years away from his father, 3 years away from Jerusalem, 3 years during which David mourned every single day for his son. Because the Bible says something heartbreaking. The spirit of the king longed to go to Absalom, for he was consoled concerning the death of Amnon. David missed Absalom. Despite what he had done, despite the murder, his father's heart could not stop loving him. But he could not bring himself to go after him. He could not bring himself to act. Once again, David remained paralyzed between love and justice, unable to exercise either one. But someone did act. Joab, David's most loyal and most pragmatic general, noticed that the king's heart was turning toward Absalom, and he devised a plan. He sent a wise woman from Tekoa to appear before David with an invented story, a parable just like Nathan's, but this time designed not to confront the king but to manipulate him. The woman told David about two sons who fought in a field, and one killed the other. Now the family wanted to kill the survivor, and she begged for mercy. David, without realizing he was being manipulated, promised to protect the son, and then the woman confronted him. If the king has said this, why does he not do the same for his own banished son? David recognized Joab's hand behind it all, and he finally relented. Let Absalom return, he said, but he added a condition: let him go to his own house and not see my face. Absalom returned to Jerusalem, but he was not received. He lived in his own house, separated from his father, for 2 more years. 2 years without seeing the face of the king. 2 years in which resentment grew like a poisonous vine around his heart. And Absalom was a man impossible to ignore. The Bible devotes entire verses to describing his appearance. In all Israel, there was no one so praised for his beauty as Absalom. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. And when he cut his hair, which he did at the end of every year because it grew too heavy for him, the hair weighed 200 shekels according to the royal standard. He was vain, he was charismatic, and he was dangerous. Absalom tried to reach Joab so that he would intercede before David. But Joab did not respond. He tried once, twice, nothing. Then Absalom did what he did best. He acted with calculated violence. He ordered his servants to set fire to Joab's barley field, and it worked. Joab came to see him immediately. And Absalom said to him, "Why did I come back from Geshur? I would have been better off staying there. I want to see the face of the king, and if there is guilt in me, let him put me to death." Joab delivered the message, and David finally agreed to see his son. Absalom entered the throne room. He bowed with his face to the ground, and David kissed him. But that reconciliation was only on the surface, because behind the bow and the kiss, Absalom was already planning something far greater than a murder. He was planning a revolution. If this story is touching your heart, subscribe now and turn on the notification bell. Here, every narrative is a journey through the sacred pages. And what comes next in the story of the sons of David will break your heart and then make you understand why God allows the ones you love most to be the ones who destroy you most. The days that followed the reconciliation brought no peace. They brought ambition. Absalom acquired a chariot, horses, and 50 men to run before him. Every morning he rose early and stood beside the gate of the city. And whenever any man of Israel came to the king to have a dispute settled, Absalom intercepted him. "What city are you from?" he would ask. And the man would answer, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would tell him, "Look, your claims are good and right, but there is no one designated by the king to hear you." And then he would add with feigned humility, "If only I were made judge in this land, so that everyone who has a grievance could come to me, and I would give them justice." And whenever someone came close to bow before him, Absalom would reach out his hand, take hold of him, and kiss him. He did this with every person who came seeking justice. And the Bible sums up the result in a sentence that cuts like a blade. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. 4 years that silent campaign lasted, 4 years of smiles, embraces, promises, and manipulation. And when Absalom felt the ground was ready, he struck. He appeared before David and asked permission to go to Hebron to fulfill a vow he had made to the Lord while he was in Geshur. David, trusting, told him, "Go in peace." And Absalom left. But he did not go to worship. He went to betray. He sent messengers throughout all the tribes of Israel with a precise instruction. As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, say, "Absalom reigns in Hebron." 200 men from Jerusalem went with him. They went innocently, knowing nothing. And while Absalom offered sacrifices, he sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, one of the wisest men in all of Israel. Ahithophel joined the conspiracy, and the rebellion grew powerful. The number of people following Absalom swelled with every passing hour. A messenger arrived before David with the news that would change everything. The hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom. David heard it, and he made a decision no one expected. He would not fight for Jerusalem. He would not turn the holy city into a battlefield. "Arise and let us flee," he told his servants. "If we do not hurry, Absalom will overtake us and bring disaster upon us, and strike the city with the edge of the sword." And so the man who once conquered Jerusalem walked out of it on foot, barefoot, weeping, his head covered in mourning. The most powerful king in Israel turned fugitive by his own son. He left 10 concubines behind to keep the palace, and he set out toward the wilderness. His faithful servants followed him. The Cherethites and Pelethites, his personal guard, marched at his side. Ittai the Gittite, a foreigner who had come from Gath with 600 men, refused to abandon him. "As the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives," he said, "wherever my lord the king shall be, whether in death or in life, there also will your servant be." David wept as he crossed the brook Kidron. All the people wept with him. They went up the Mount of Olives. David climbed weeping, with his head covered and his feet bare. And all who were with him covered their heads as well, and went up weeping. But the humiliation was not over. As David fled, a man from the family of Saul came out to meet him. His name was Shimei, and he began to curse him. He hurled stones at him. He threw dust, and he shouted, get out, you man of blood, you worthless man. The Lord has repaid you for all the blood of the house of Saul. You have handed the kingdom over to your son Absalom, and look, your own evil has caught up with you, for you are a man of blood." Abishai, one of David's generals, wanted to cut off Shimei's head on the spot. But David stopped him. "If God has told him to curse me, who can tell him not to? My own son seeks to take my life. How much more this Benjaminite? Let him curse, for perhaps the Lord will look on my affliction and repay me with good for his cursing today." And he kept walking. The dust clung to his face, wet with tears. Stones fell around him, and David did not defend himself, because he knew that everything he was living through was the consequence of what he himself had sown. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, Absalom entered as a conqueror, and Ahithophel the counselor gave him the most infamous counsel that ever came from human lips. "Go into your father's concubines, the ones he left to keep the house. When all Israel hears that you have made yourself an abomination to your father, the hands of all who are with you will be strengthened." And Absalom did it. They set up a tent on the rooftop of the palace, and there, in the sight of all Israel, Absalom lay with his father's concubines. Nathan's prophecy was fulfilled to the letter. "I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor, and he will lie with your wives in the sight of the sun. For you did this in secret, but I will do this before all Israel and in broad daylight." David's secret sin on the rooftop was returned like a shattered mirror on the very same rooftop by his own son. And then Ahithophel proposed the final blow. "Give me 12,000 men tonight," he told Absalom. "I will fall upon David while he is weary and weak. I will terrify him. His people will flee, and I will strike down only the king." The plan was perfect, lethal. Had Absalom carried it out, David would have died that very night. But God was not finished with David. Because there was a man in Jerusalem working secretly on behalf of the fugitive king. His name was Hushai, and he was a double agent David had planted in Absalom's court before fleeing. When Absalom also consulted Hushai, he gave the opposite counsel. "Do not attack tonight," he said. "You know your father and his men. They are mighty warriors. They are as fierce as a bear robbed of her cubs in the wild. Your father is a man of war. He will not spend the night with the troops. He will be hidden in some cave or other place. If some of your men fall first, whoever hears of it will say that there has been a slaughter among Absalom's followers, and even the bravest soldier will lose heart. Instead, gather all Israel from Dan to Beersheba and go to battle yourself." Hushai's counsel was a brilliant trap. It aimed to buy David time to cross the Jordan and regroup. And Absalom, blinded by his own vanity, accepted it. The counsel of Ahithophel, the sound one, was rejected. For the Lord had ordained to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel, so that the Lord might bring disaster upon Absalom. When Ahithophel saw that his counsel had not been followed, he knew all was lost. He went to his house, he set his affairs in order, and he hanged himself. The wisest man in Israel chose death over defeat. Meanwhile, Hushai sent an urgent message to David through the priests Zadok and Abiathar. "Do not spend the night at the fords of the wilderness. Cross the Jordan immediately, or the king and all the people with him will be swallowed up." David obeyed. He crossed the Jordan with all his people before dawn. Not a single one was left behind. And then the day of battle arrived. David organized his army. He divided it into 3 parts, 1/3 under the command of Joab, another under Abishai, Joab's brother, and the 3rd under Ittai, the Gittite. David wanted to march out with them, but the people would not let him. "You are worth 10,000 of us. It is better that you support us from the city." And David agreed. But before they marched out, he stood beside the gate, and he spoke to the 3 generals, to Joab, to Abishai, to Ittai, and he gave an order that everyone heard. "Deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom." All the people heard it. Every soldier, every captain. It was the father speaking, not the king. The father who loved his son despite everything, despite the betrayal, despite the rebellion, despite the concubines violated on the rooftop. David still loved Absalom, and that made everything more terrible. The battle was fought in the forest of Ephraim, and it was a massacre. 20,000 men fell that day. And the Bible adds a chilling detail. The forest devoured more people than the sword. The trees, the ravines, the thick undergrowth became death traps for Absalom's men as they fled in desperation. The land itself seemed to fight against the rebel, and then it happened. Absalom was riding his mule, fleeing through the forest. The animal passed beneath the thick branches of a great oak, and Absalom's head got caught in the oak. The mule kept going, and Absalom was left hanging between heaven and earth, alone, trapped, alive, dangling from the branches of the tree by the hair that had been his greatest pride, that hair that weighed 200 shekels, that hair that all Israel admired. Now it was his snare, his prison, his sentence. A soldier saw him and ran to tell Joab. "I saw Absalom hanging in an oak." Joab glared at him with fury. "You saw him and you did not strike him down right there. I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a belt." But the soldier answered with the dignity that Joab lacked. "Even if you weighed out 1,000 shekels of silver in my hand, I would not raise my hand against the king's son. For we all heard when the king commanded you, Abishai and Ittai, beware that no one touch the young man Absalom." Joab wasted no more time. "I will not waste my time with you," he said. He took 3 javelins in his hand, and he thrust them into Absalom's heart. He was still alive in the middle of the oak when the javelins pierced his chest. Then 10 young armor-bearers of Joab surrounded the body and struck him dead. Silence. The trumpet sounded. The battle was over. They took Absalom's body, they cast it into a great pit in the middle of the forest, and they raised over him a very large heap of stones. Absalom, who in life had taken stones and erected a pillar for himself in the king's valley, because he said he had no son to preserve his name, now lay without a monument, without a crown, without a name. Beneath a pile of stones in a forest, no one would remember. And then someone had to carry the news to the king. Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, wanted to run first, but Joab stopped him. "You shall not carry the news today, for the king's son is dead. He sent a Cushite instead." But Ahimaaz insisted until Joab relented, and he ran faster than the Cushite. He arrived first. David was sitting between the two gates of the city. The watchman went up to the wall and saw a man running alone, and then another behind him. David said, "If he comes alone, he brings good news." When Ahimaaz arrived, he bowed before the king and said, "All is well. Blessed be the Lord your God, who has delivered up the men who raised their hand against my lord the king." And David asked one question, the only one that mattered: "Is the young man Absalom safe?" Ahimaaz faltered. He did not have the courage to speak the truth. "I saw a great commotion," he said, "but I do not know what it was." David told him to step aside. Then the Cushite arrived. "Good news for my lord the king," he said. "The Lord has vindicated you today against all who rose up against you." And David asked again, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" And the Cushite answered with a phrase that was a death sentence dressed in courtesy, "May the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise against you for evil be like that young man." David understood. He rose, he went up to the chamber above the gate, and he wept. And as he climbed, between every step, between every sob, he repeated the most heartbreaking words a father has ever spoken. "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom. Would that I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son." David's weeping was heard throughout the entire city. The soldiers returning victorious bowed their heads. The celebration turned into mourning. Victory became shame because the king wept for his son, and no one could comfort him. That day, David did not only lose Absalom, he had lost Amnon years before. He had lost Tamar, who lived desolate for the rest of her days. He had lost the dignity of his concubines, violated on the rooftop in fulfillment of a prophecy he himself had provoked. He had lost the unity of Israel, fractured by a civil war that would leave scars for generations. And it all began on a rooftop, with a glance, with a desire that was not restrained, with a sin that seemed secret, but that God saw from the very beginning. "The sword shall never depart from your house." Nathan said it, and it came to pass, not because God wanted to destroy David, but because sin has consequences, and those consequences do not stop with the one who sins. They spread, they multiply, they are inherited. David's adultery with Bathsheba gave birth to the lust of Amnon. David's cowardice before Amnon gave birth to the vengeance of Absalom. David's passivity before Absalom gave birth to the rebellion that split Israel. Every silence of the father was a seed of destruction in the son. Every sin left unconfronted was an unspoken permission for the next one. David repaid fourfold what he had taken, exactly as he himself had decreed upon hearing Nathan's parable. The son of Bathsheba died. Amnon was murdered. Absalom fell pierced by 3 javelins, and later Adonijah would follow the same path. 4 sons, 4 deaths, 4 times the lamb returned. This story is not merely the story of an ancient king. It is a mirror that reflects what happens when a father looks the other way, when silence becomes the answer to injustice, when sin is swept under the rug in the belief that no one will ever see it. David was a man after God's own heart, but not even that shielded him from the consequences of his choices, because God forgives sin, always. The mercy of God is real, deep, inexhaustible. But forgiveness does not cancel the harvest. What you sow, you will reap. And sometimes the harvest arrives in the lives of those you love the most. Today, right now, seeds are growing in your life. Seeds you planted with your words, with your silences, with your choices, with what you did in secret, thinking no one could see. There are children who are watching. There are families absorbing every example, every excuse, every failure to act. The story of David is not in the Bible, so that we can admire it from a distance. It is there so that we can see ourselves in it, so that we can examine what rooftops we have been visiting, what Uriah we have been sacrificing for convenience, what Tamar we have been abandoning with our silence, what Absalom we have been feeding with our inaction. Because the sword that entered the house of David was not wielded by an enemy. It was forged by David himself, with his decisions, with his passions, with his cowardice. And that is the part of the story that hurts the most, because that is the part that looks most like our own. But there is hope, because from that same broken, fractured, blood-stained lineage of David, Solomon was born. And from the lineage of Solomon, generations later, a child was born in Bethlehem, a descendant of David who would not repeat the king's mistakes, who would not fall on the rooftop, who would not remain silent before injustice, who would not flee from his own children. His name was Jesus, and where David failed, Jesus fulfilled. Where David sowed swords, Jesus planted grace. Where David wept over a dead son, God the Father gave his own Son so that none of us would have to die under the weight of our own choices. The sword that never departed from the house of David was finally stopped, not in a palace, not in a battle, but on a cross, where the Son of David died willingly so that the curse could be broken, so that the chain could be severed, so that you and I could start again. The story of the sons of David ended in blood, but the story of the Son of David ended in resurrection. And that is the difference that changes everything. It does not matter what you have sown until today. It does not matter how many rooftops you have visited. It does not matter how many cowardly silences you carry on your shoulders. Today is the day to break the cycle. Today is the day to stop being David on the rooftop and to start being David on his knees in Psalm 51, crying out with all his heart, "Create in me a clean heart, O God. Renew a right spirit within me." Because the God who forgave David forgives you too, but do not wait for the sword to enter your house before you act. Do not wait for the prophet to look you in the eye and tell you that you are that man. Act today, confess today, change today, because every day that passes without repentance is one more seed planted in the field of your children. And the harvest, sooner or later, always comes. If this story touched your heart, write in the comments, "Today I break the cycle."